And we are live, everybody. Welcome to this week's Café Hangout.
I am John Pollock, along with Ting. Thank you for checking in live here on the Café Hangout. It is the post-mortem after the WWE's big earnings call for the fourth quarter and encapsulating the entire year of 2019. Today's edition of the Café Hangout is brought to you by the word transformative. That will be a word that we will probably use quite a lot. Wei and I also were thinking of maybe making this a really authentic post-investors call show by doing the entire thing on speakerphone. How would that have been?
Man, that sucks.
Hello, everybody. Good quarter. Revenue's up. And,
You figure for a company.
Did Vince need a lozenge or something at the beginning of that call? He was either in the middle of eating something or he had something in his throat. I was thinking of Darren Drozdoff, asking him to puke by the end of it.
Wow. You figure for a multimedia company boasting record profits, it's, not that difficult to set up a proper microphone setup.
Skype?
Something like that. But whatever. It's authentic, isn't it?
Well, this show is authentic, and we are going to be joined by the leader of the Wrestlenomics movement. Brandon Thurston is going to be on the call with us in just a little bit, as we're going to be going through the earnings report, the investors call afterward, and how successful the company was in taking last week's very damaging news that the stock is certainly still feeling the reverberations from, and how successful they were in managing expectations for 2020 and shifting the focus. And, Wei, as someone that was following all of this today, what would you say would have been the headline of this call this morning?
Well, let me just again preface that a lot of this stuff is still relatively new to me. I'm not really somebody who follows numbers, finances as it relates to the company in a great way. But as somebody who
provide some color on that for us.
What do you mean?
That's
color. Yes,
we want lots of color.
Yeah, my main takeaways I think coming out of it seem to be not so much, perhaps a lot of fallout from even the firings of Barrios and Wilson, and maybe more so this being overshadowed by what Vince was discussing as it related to the future of the WWE Network.
That seemed to be the major discussion point coming out of this. It was far less focused on the departures of George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, and even further to that, it seemed that the plummeting of the stock was not even something that felt as though it was a sky is falling mentality from the investors, although it seemed the concern was primarily centered on why aren't these deals done yet with India and the Middle East, North Africa region, and what's going on with the XFL. Can give us anything. And everyone was on message throughout this whole thing that the XFL is a total separate entity. Mm-hmm. After me, everybody, total separate entity.
Specifically, there are 400 people employed by the company, so it has nothing to do with this.
Yes, and Vince McMahon has very broad shoulders. I can do a lot. Mm-hmm. What were some other gems from him? AEW has not led to any change in our product at all. And in regards to replacements for Barrios and Wilson, I mean, who wouldn't want to work with us?
Didn't throw that laugh in there, but
he did have the laugh in there, actually, when he said who wouldn't want to work with us. He did have a chuckle in there, which is rare for Vince on these calls.
What were your takeaways, John?
Well, first of all, it was certainly placing Frank Riddick in the George Barrios role.
Mm-hmm. He's the interim CFO.
Yes, certainly has not inherited the vocabulary of George Barrios on conference call number 1, but I would say there was still a lot of uncertainty at the end of this. Smaller point would be, it sounds like a very quick move to exit Barrios and Wilson. They're searching for replacements and also looking and trying to maintain the illusion that, or not illusion, but that, we have the infrastructure here that we can digest these losses and not skip a beat, which was the language Vince McMahon used. But yes, it's the future of the WWE Network that they seem to be much more forthcoming in being open about any deal that there are deals on the table that are in advanced stages that could be announced in this quarter, in the first quarter of the year, with regards to their key OTT content, which you would read as the pay-per-views, to be worked out in a deal with a major streaming player that's out there. So that's going to bring to mind your ESPN Pluses, DAZNs. There's the Peacock network that NBC Universal is launching coming up in the spring. But it's funny that you and I were just talking about this as like this pie in the sky theory about what would WrestleMania do on Fox. And while we might not be talking about linear television, WrestleMania being on a non-WWE network streaming platform seems like something tangible now.
Coming off of the reported success of what UFC has done for ESPN Plus, I'm sure WWE is looking at that. Maybe not so much WWE, but all of ESPN Plus's competitors are looking at what other comparative.
What's a product
properties
that is analogous to UFC that can drive similar engagement
that people are used to paying for on pay-per-view? And wrestling, I think, would be the closest thing. So really interesting, perhaps, this potential shift in direction for WWE's pay-per-view properties. And we'll be talking to Brandon a lot more about that. Do you have any more clarity? I mean, they did. Some investors did call in referring to what changes will take place after Barrios and Wilson. Somebody actually specifically tried to ask for a bit more detail about what those disagreements might have been. Do you have any more clarity about that?
It seemed like they were very vague, other than to say that our strategy has not changed. It was more so the execution of that strategy, which is where the two sides differed. Obviously, there's much more to it than that. It has to be the fact that both presidents are on their way out. But when you piece little things together, and granted, you are doing a bit of speculation here, Barrios and Michelle Wilson were very much tied to the WWE Network. And coming out of this call, it tells me there was a fundamental shift in the philosophy around the WWE Network. You can look at the subscriber numbers that this thing peaked at WrestleMania 34 in 2018. That was where they were on WrestleMania Day. When you include all subscribers, they were over 2.1 million subscribers. At this past quarter, they were at just over 1.45 million at the end of 2019. They're only projecting a minor bump this year for Royal Rumble season in the first quarter and the lead up to WrestleMania. It seems like they have realized that those ridiculous figures that we had at the onset, that George Barrios was a big proponent of, 3 to 4 million subscribers based on their data, that's not happening. 2 million paid subscribers does not look like it's within reach. So are you going to take, hey, we're going to pivot to rights fees for a lot of these big shows with the hope that there's still going to be a core base that will keep this network? I mean, that's the other question, is what becomes of the network if your biggest content drivers you're being sent elsewhere and to pay extra on another service.
And again, I think we can look at UFC as a potential, sample of what the network can turn into with what they use for Fight Pass.
For the hardcores, a boutique product that is going to satisfy, if they removed all the pay-per-views, that number isn't going to, a minuscule amount. It's still fine. And it's also way less operating costs when you're taking out the live aspect of all of that live content that you run on the network. That can you run it at a much more reduced level? And to me, that it has a lot of ripple effects. The NXT satellite promotions, like, are you just going to view these as, we need to have television if we're going there? We want to have a BT Sport in place on day one, not 2 years into it, because just putting all this for the WWE Network, like, that's no longer the WWE Network's role to house these promotions that are going to be loss leaders for us.
Potentially, it could also mean, a ramped up acquisition of other properties, like what Fight Pass tends to do with other promotions than the UFC that they air on that service. So could they be turning that into, a platform similar to Fight or something like that?
It would seem that the two ideas that would be at odds would be a scaling down of the network and, siphoning off the pay-per-views, with the idea that we had been hearing forever about this tiered network system. Like, that doesn't really compute to me this time, where we're going to be introducing higher tiers when we're taking away the most valuable properties on this network. And maybe that gives you some idea into what the philosophical divide was, because, Wilson and Barrios were very much like kind of when you looked at the whole shareholders presentation that they do every year around WrestleMania time, they were the two public faces of that tiered network system and presenting it to the public, and they were going to be attached to that. And this to me seems like a a step in another direction that I don't know how you take away the pay-per-views and introduce like a higher tiered system.
Yeah. Before we move on, I suppose, and get into maybe some phone calls, any like major figures, like, performance wise that you wanted to introduce to the audience?
I mean, in terms of just the actual report and some of the the big stories coming out of it. I mean, this is
they're boasting a record-setting year for profits.
Yes,
and a record-setting quarter. Highest quarterly revenue in WWE history.
Yeah, they had revenue of $322.8 million for the quarter. Gigantic. Net income of just over $69 million. For the year, they had overall, their net income for the year was just over $77 million. That is down from 2019, but that was also this year. They put a ton into their new headquarters and infrastructure. So that's going to be their major source of expenditures for the next couple of years. Adjusted OIBDA was right at $180 million, which they pretty much outlined and stated as much last week with the Barrios and Wilson news, that it was going to be on the low end of their estimate from the last quarter, and that did cause that certainly was part and parcel with the stock drop, was the adjusted figure that they were anticipating. But I mean, this is a company that it is living off their core content rights fees, and I think they're looking at, some of our most valuable products are on the WWE Network. That is no longer in a growth period. It's now in decline. So do we strip this apart and sell the most valuable pieces when there's streaming companies out there that are craving potential content like this from us?
Yes. Any further insight as to what Saudi Arabia's contributions were for this report?
The other figure is what it would be worked into. I'll look that up.
Okay.
For that figure as well. But yeah, that was figured in because we did have the Crown Jewel show back in October.
The current stock price as of this recording is 44.75 US, which is down 8.67% from yesterday, I suppose. And earlier it opened up at 40.24, which was I believe a 21-month low.
Yeah, I think overnight it actually dipped below $40.
Really?
In like after hours trading. So it had a very low open today at the $40 mark.
Do you want to go to our first phone call?
Yes, let's take some calls before we get to Brandon.
Hello, caller. You're on the air. What's going on? Caller, you're in the cafe. Can you hear us? Going once, going twice. Nope.
Gone.
Okay.
We also had a couple notes here from the call. With regards to the India and Middle Eastern TV deals, they just said that there had been regulatory issues in India that had complicated the negotiations. Now, that deal has expired, but they are still on the air there, just I presume under the existing deal that had run up. And then with the Middle Eastern deal, they cited the intricacies of working with the Saudi Arabian government as the reason for that holdup. Intricacies. And that was one thing. Like, they didn't present any cause for concern that these deals would be completed. It only is a matter of the timing of when they will be complete. So they very much wanted to convey that there should be no panic about these deals. They're coming.
Let's go to the phone lines. Neil, you're on the air. What's going on?
Hi, guys. Yeah, I would just like to join in with John and say my least favorite new management speak phrase, which you alluded to, is, can you provide some color? Which one of them said, and then it seemed to be every other caller on the investor call wanted to. I've never heard that phrase today.
It's in the handbook.
It's got its own lingo that might as well be as sort of confusing as professional wrestling lingo to an outsider.
I suppose so. Yeah. But I've never heard that phrase before today, and I never want to hear it again. What's wrong with saying, can you elaborate? Or can you have some, could we get further? Anyway.
How close do you follow the financials typically, Neil?
Not much. What you guys provide and what I see on Twitter from Brandon Thurston, that is not Brandon from New Jersey, although who knows?
I'd love to hear his analysis at some point.
I'm sure you will. But yeah, and I was with you on Vince's voice. He may as well have been one of Charlie Brown's teachers at the start of that call. I couldn't catch a word of what he was saying. But yes, corporate finance is a mystery to me. But I don't understand how anyone could take the word of Vince McMahon that they won't miss a beat, that he has broad shoulders, that he knows what's happening, and dangling vague promises of better monetization of their, I think he said, most premium content, meaning, I guess, is the pay-per-views.
You say that, Neil, and I absolutely understand it. Because like look no further than what was it this time last year when he was questioned about live events and him saying that we know how to fix this, and I suppose the fix ultimately was to cut shows. But at the same time, it seems like he is a required presence for a lot of these stockholders to maintain their confidence in the company's operations.
Yes, well, I guess he's the kind of, no pun intended, the rock, on the which the company is. He's the figurehead. He's the constant. But he's also a bit of a ringmaster, and they must know that. And on the consumer side, I mean, we've all gotten used to, for years, paying the flat fee of $9.99 for the network, which includes all of the pay-per-views. And that's going to be hard for people to move from, I think. I noticed recently with the move to BT Sport in the UK that when the Royal Rumble was coming up, they were advertising it as a traditional pay-per-view buy for $19.95. That's British pounds, which is about $25 US. And of course, why would I pay that when I'm paying $9.99 every month to get everything for free? But if that's the road they're going down, I think it's a rocky one. Potentially, who's going to pay for the likes of, was it TLC last year, where there really wasn't any card, I think, apart from one or two matches until the day?
Well, it could be a case where those stay on the network and you only save the big four for pay-per-view, Thank you very much for the call, Neil. We got to cut you off because we got to go to our guest for the show, Brandon.
Yeah, and that, it brings about the many questions of, having still something to stabilize the WWE Network, and that could very well be the compromise in that your big four, your big five pay-per-views end up somewhere else, and you keep the smaller B shows, your takeovers for the WWE Network, because there's also the question at hand of that if you are to move such a major pay-per-view event, what impact that's going to have on your worldwide audience. So joining us now, a staple whenever we have these big earnings calls from the WWE, and this may be the most newsworthy, at least going into it today. Brandon Thurston joins us, the man behind Wrestlenomics Radio. Brandon, how are you today? It's a transformative day, and we wanted to have you on to discuss the theme of the day.
It is. It's the maybe the biggest quarterly report we've had in some time, maybe since I've been trying to cover this stuff since about 2015.
So going back, and it feels ages at this point, to a week ago with the news dropping about George Barrios and Michelle Wilson. I mean, I found it pretty stunning. But what was your initial reaction that day, just getting that news and just the veracity of such an impactful move that the company made just 7 days ago?
Yeah, it was really surprising, especially for the investment community. George Barrios, who was one of the co-presidents, had been really the face of WWE, going to conference calls and doing a lot of the talking on these conference calls in the quarterly reports. And Michelle Wilson had been the chief marketing officer before that, before she was a co-president. So these two are really the top executives on the business end. And of course, Vince is the CEO. But I never expected them to be fired when they were. And you see the stock price fall by about 7% on the day today, but I think it fell something like 20% after the market closed when they made that announcement on Thursday. So I guess they all we really got from the press release was that there were some differences in vision, and I don't know what that really means. But we learned today, as you guys were talking about a moment ago, that it looks like WWE is thinking about selling its pay-per-views to maybe a bigger streaming player, and with the WWE Network really being the pitch of George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, it looks like maybe that may have been the biggest factor in explaining their exit.
It would certainly seem, and we were just discussing this, that this move that was Vince McMahon for a deal that is not complete, they were very open about how big this deal could be for them. It very much comes at odds from what we've heard from George Barrios and Michelle Wilson, who have been really the public faces of that tiered system, that it would seem to be at odds to be introducing a price increase at certain levels on the network when you could potentially as well be auctioning off your most desired content on there.
Yeah, it really leads you to believe that maybe Vince was privately disappointed with how the network was performing. The network has been down, I think, every quarter since WrestleMania. The most recent WrestleMania, it's been down in year-over-year comparisons. It was down in this quarter, Q4. Their projection for subscribers for Q1 is going to be down year-over-year as well. So I could see, maybe it's just my speculation, but Vince, sort of having some regret or feeling that the WWE Network is not working out the way he wanted it to, and like, just honestly, it may just be a better financial move to sell the pay-per-views to a big streaming player. I don't know. Maybe like Peacock. They're NBC Universal is launching Peacock later this year. Maybe DAZN. I'm sure Vince saw what happened with UFC and how they sold their pay-per-views to ESPN Plus and the great deal that they got for that. So it may just work out to be a better financial deal for WWE.
It wasn't as if, they came right out and announced that, hey, we're going to take all these off the network and we're going to do this and all that. But, I mean, it was certainly mentioned and alluded to more than once. How much of it do you think, this was them thinking about what big news we could use to perhaps instill more confidence in our stockholders, or just to get out of this kind of rut that they're in PR-wise?
I mean, I think it's a real deal. It's probably going to happen. Vince seemed very confident in saying that, just to give you an idea of how far along this thing is, he said that it sounds like they may even be able to complete it by Q1. So, I mean, it definitely helps. It takes some attention. It causes some distraction from a lot of the concern and anxiety around Barrios and Wilson being out. But I think this is a real deal. And if it turns out to be as impressive as it could be, it could really help their stock recover from the losses that they've had in the last week.
Can you envision a model for the WWE Network that kind of approximates what a lot of people thought should have been its projection at the beginning, that you put on the B pay-per-views and then your biggest ones would be saved for pay-per-view, in this case, licensing them out to larger streaming players, and that way you satisfy at least your hardcore base. There will be probably some drop to the network, but not, pulling the plug on something that they've been, so attached to this project for, about a decade now, when you look at all the planning that went into it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see something like that. I definitely agree that just in hindsight, it's pretty easy to see that the way that the WWE Network launched in 2014 at $9.99 is put all the pay-per-views on there. They would have made more money if they had kept WrestleMania and maybe 2 or 3 other pay-per-views exclusively on pay-per-view. But I think it's more likely that they're going to sell all the events. I mean, I guess just looking at what UFC did, I guess UFC sold 20 of its events annually to ESPN Plus. WWE I'm sure could do what they're doing, 12 to 15 pay-per-views a year. So I would expect it to be more of they sell all of those pay-per-views in a package to a big streaming player to get maximum value out of it.
And what do you feel like eliminating the pay-per-views? Where do you see that the WWE Network becoming in the WWE's business? Like, certainly it is a distant priority at that point. How much revenue are you putting into upkeep of the network and focusing on it with new original content versus just being a library?
Right, I guess that's the question, and it could just end up being something like Fight Pass, where you basically have the library, and maybe you find some other stuff there. I know there's been talk for years now about putting Progress and Evolve on the WWE Network, and that's yet to materialize. So I know the UFC, just to liken it to UFC puts a lot of secondary MMA promotions on Fight Pass, and maybe there's some sort of in-ring content that they could provide in that way, and there's still a ton of other content on the WWE Network, as well as I think there's value just in the library. I'm sure if you took all the pay-per-views off the network, the subscribership is going to fall tremendously. But I think there's still a market for WWE's enormous tape library. But yeah.
Do you have any further insight after recent numbers about perhaps the contributions of Saudi Arabia and maybe just any further thought on, I guess, how they presented sort of the difficulties in trying to organize a deal with KSA?
Yeah, so it looks like to me that the Saudi Arabia deal was worth maybe another $40 to $50 million. That's about in the range of what each event has been worth up to this point. There's also talk about some international TV deals, including a MENA TV deal, which is a Middle East North Africa TV deal, and an India TV deal. The India TV deal, I believe, has expired. It's still, I guess, Raw is still, and maybe SmackDown too. Raw is definitely still airing in India. The explanation was that there were regulatory changes with India that made completing the deal difficult, and so the but the Middle East North Africa partner is a channel called MBC, which is, I believe, 60% ownership by the government of Saudi Arabia. So they're dealing with the same partner there that they're dealing with for the events. So, I think Frank Riddick, who is the interim CFO in the absence of George Barrios, said there's just some intricacies in dealing with the government of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that was our second keyword of this conference call, intricacies.
Yeah.
As you kind of look, so much is focused on the company's business when it comes to their rights fees and such. When you're looking at the other sectors of the business, we could start off with live events. What did this year's earnings report tell you about that sector, and any conclusions on your own about the company's strategy? It appears to certainly decrease house shows moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, other than decreasing the number of shows that they run, I don't know if they really have a strategy, and maybe that's just. I think part of that is just due to the popularity of the product and all of these downstream effects that we see with engagement metrics, with whether it's viewership or merchandise sales or ticket sales. All this, I think, just has to do with the quality of the product and the stars that they create or have been created. But the live events total attendance for the year was down. They were at about 1.5 million in total attendance worldwide, and they've broken 2 million in many years prior to this. But in Q4 they ran fewer events in North America, so the average was up. So their average attendance was 5,800 for Q4, which was a lot better than it's been in Q4 the last couple of years. But they ran far fewer events.
Yeah.
And by the way, so live events at this point are in most quarters, excluding the WrestleMania quarter, is losing money. It lost money again, but that WrestleMania quarter is so strong that the entire division does make money. So I kind of feel like maybe we're just at this point, at least in the way that WWE is right now, that live events are just kind of a loss leader. It's something that you have to have to create the media and sell the media and have TV rights and to have pay-per-view and to have a WWE Network or to sell it to a streaming player so you can make a lot of money that way.
Yeah, and it would seem like the strategy is almost to get away from your smaller towns that are going to drag that average down, and we're going to see house shows more limited to your A and B markets to complement television and pay-per-view. That it's not going to be those tiny spots that never get WWE. It seems those are the ones that are most likely to be eliminated in this new era.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's not something I know for sure. I guess we could look at maybe if they do end up running fewer shows over the next year or so to see if there are if Fargo, North Dakota is that South Dakota? I think it's in North Dakota, right? But anyway, if Fargo is not being run as much as it was once before, but yeah, you would think that those events in the smallest markets are going to draw the smallest crowds and are going to be the hardest to profit from. So that makes sense.
In terms of the investors' call, and if they're going into this call with the idea of switching the conversation away from the past week of news, how successful do you think they were over the course of this call and instilling confidence in their investors? Do you think that was successful today?
Well, not super successful because I'm looking at the stock price right now and it's down about 9.5% on the day, which is it was up at around I think 49 yesterday. So I think there was in general compared to other conference calls, the financial analysts who get to ask questions, there's a lot more of a vibe of uncertainty and anxiety with them than there is usually. And to the point where a couple times the XFL question was asked and whether WWE is going to end up being more involved with the XFL. And emphatically, Vince had to make it very clear that no, they're totally separate companies. And he says that there's 400 employees working for the XFL, and it's not going to be something that the WWE is involved in. And there's actually this lawsuit that was just found the documentation, found the complaint in December for there's a very small investor called the Oklahoma Firefighters Pension and Retirement System that's filed a lawsuit, and they're not claiming any financial damages yet, but they're demanding records because they're alleging that basically WWE sold to Alpha Entertainment, which is the parent company of XFL. They sold to Alpha Entertainment the intellectual property for XFL, and W employees have been providing support services to the XFL. And this is all part of the public record in the SEC filings. But the plaintiff is alleging that we don't know how these rates were calculated. There's evidence that the Ebersol family is going to offer $50 million for the XFL IP, when they were interested in it before they ran the AAF. So the plaintiff is basically alleging that maybe there's these transactions happening between WWE and the XFL parent company that are well below market value, which is therefore not in the investor's interest.
Onto the topic of NXT, which was brought up at one point. Any insight on maybe how much exactly that deal might be bringing the WWE right now? From all accounts, it seems like Vince is pretty happy.
Yeah, I was really hoping that we would learn something about what the NXT TV deal was worth, if anything. When that deal was announced a few months ago in September, we heard everything from $60 million a year to $30 million a year to rumors that maybe they're not getting hardly any money at all for it. But it's the way that WWE is reporting their accounting. They're putting the Raw and SmackDown money in with the NXT money in a line called core content rights fees. So because this was the first quarter with the big upgrades in the new US TV deals for Raw and SmackDown, there's a big jump in this Q4 compared to all the quarters in the past. So it's really hard to splice out we don't have like a regular pattern for Raw and SmackDown to say, oh, it's higher this time by a little bit. So maybe that's kind of the NXT money. The jump is so enormous, and I don't know exactly how to do the math to say, well, this is what we should have expected if there wasn't NXT in it. So I don't. Maybe we'll get to some more clues in the annual report that should come out in maybe about an hour or so, and maybe there's some other math we can do to try and unpack it. But I just don't know right now. But the NXT was mentioned, and AEW was mentioned on the call. There was a question about it. Vince said that AEW is not changing anything in terms of how they make their content. And I know people get kind of funny about the word competition, but he said, yeah, the NXT is competing with AEW. He said that outright, and he's very happy with how NXT is doing on Wednesday night. He said they're doing extremely well, even though AEW is beating NXT head-to-head on TNT in just about every demographic except for viewers over the age of 50.
He also said that the need for edgy content is not there, and that they're proud to be a PG product. And the whole time, I'm wishing, like in this slideshow, they throw up some highlights of the past several months of Bobby Lashley, Lana, wonderful PG content as well. How much of these investors do you think actually watch the shows versus just looking at the numbers?
Very few of them. I think there's probably some of the analysts who occasionally watch, but there's definitely a huge difference between the kind of analysis that you get from wrestling fans, the way that wrestling fans react to events like today, and the way that the analysts react to it. I mean, I don't think any of them are very strong wrestling fans, and they look at this as a media business, just like they look at Netflix or look at Disney, and it's their background is talking about media strategy and thinking about how WWE is going to monetize whatever. And I think the biggest difference that those analysts miss is how important creating stars is to WWE's business, and that's the one thing that they're hardly ever pressed on that I think is so central to their business and can so greatly affect their business. And I think the decline in a lot of metrics that I've seen over the last few years, it coincides with the increased absence of John Cena over the last few years and the lack of, I think, any comparable star in his place.
And I think that's, to me, the biggest divide, that if you are looking at this possible WWE Network deal on the table, is that you're instantly going to compare to what the UFC has been able to bring to ESPN Plus. And, we don't see what those numbers are up until this past Conor McGregor-Donald Cerrone fight, but that's entirely star-driven, and that's going to fluctuate from event to event, with your ultimate peak last month with the McGregor fight, that the WWE certainly does not have anything approximating a Conor McGregor that they're bringing to these streaming services. And I think that's a huge aspect to when people are deciding if they are going to spend money or not on a specialty attraction like that.
Yeah, and so you guys pay more attention to UFC than I do. Would you say that, though, although UFC, in the case of when you have big Conor McGregor fights, the peaks are way bigger than even a WrestleMania, but is the average audience for WWE larger than the average audience for UFC?
I would say consistently, yes. When WWE is still on its worst weeks, still topping 2 million viewers every Monday night, that's certainly going to be dwarfing what your typical fight night card is going to be doing. But certainly the highs are that much more dramatic for a big UFC card.
Yeah, so I think that's part of the calculus there, is that, hey, we've got a bigger average audience than something like UFC, so maybe we can get a deal that's maybe even better than what they're getting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's. Do you even think like this this strategy. Like if you were assessing this, Brandon, about the WWE Network and looking at the data, that it would suggest that it really did peak in terms of subscribers about 2 years ago. Like, is there newfound subscribers to be found at the network, or is this a pretty worthwhile idea if these people are coming to the table and offering you enormous money for the rights to your biggest events?
I think it is, and I think everything in WWE could really be exploded based on whether or not they're able to create stars. And I just think that as long as Vince McMahon is, able, he's going to be behind creative, and WWE is going to have these same problems creating stars. So I guess if that's the hand that you're dealt, and you're not going to explode the business downstream by creating massive stars in the sense of like a John Cena or a Steve Austin or a Rock or a Hogan or something like that, then I guess put all your eggs in the basket of media strategy, and rather than betting that you can make a huge amount of money with direct to consumer, you can just, maybe instead of that, you can just do business deals and sell your media rights to somebody else that's going to give you guaranteed money for it.
It's worked well for the UFC, with the absence of, somebody comparable to Conor McGregor. That guaranteed money probably looks pretty good to the WWE right now. Yes,
in
please.
the case of UFC, they're selling the pay-per-views. Like, those are still pay-per-view events that you have to pay an individual fee for. And I guess a big question is how is WWE going to deal with that? I think it's less likely that they're going to sell an individual pay-per-view buy like ever again. I think just by having what it's been since 2014, that most anybody's paid for a pay-per-view for WWE, and you've sold it all for a $10 monthly package. I think it's gonna be a really hard sell if the idea is, which I don't think the idea is to sell a pay-per-view in the sense that UFC is on ESPN Plus. So I think that's what's going to happen, and I think it leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Not that they're not financially manageable questions, but unanswered questions about how is that gonna how are things gonna unfold in international markets like Canada, for example, where you've got a whole different approach to the WWE Network.
Yeah, I think that the resulting price, if that were to be the case, the resulting price of these individual pay-per-views would be really interesting too. Could they go back up to the price that they were before the WWE Network? That would be I would say it'd be a pretty bold move. I am of I think the confidence that if a wrestling fan wants to see a show, they'll be willing to pay for it, but I suppose, what is that limit?
Yeah. Yeah, I just think, what were they selling pay-per-views for before they made the switch? Like $55, I think, just for the standard def, or $65 for the high def. And I think that was at a time where WWE was a bit more popular than it is now. So I think it would be a really hard sell.
Before we wrap up, I guess as we go into 2020, it just, in light of the last 7 days, it just puts this company in such an interesting light, because here we are, the Fox and USA deals have kicked off. It's going to be record revenue for years to come. Like, there is so much stability with this company, and yet it seems like this is the highest point, I would say, of uncertainty among stockholders, just because of these moves and questions about the future, even though they've got these deals in place, and the company has never been more stable at such a high level.
Yeah, it's a very financially stable company. I think they really expected to do better at the year end of 2019 than they did here. They still broke the revenue record. This was still the highest revenue year ever for WWE. They still hit record annual operating income. Their adjusted OIBDA, their magic profit metric, adjusted OIBDA, was on the low end of the range that they had to adjust down to in the middle of the year. Their net income was short of the record that they set last year of like $100 million. It was $77 million in net income this year. So, and I've even done the adjusted for inflation. So that's in like attitude era range. Last year that was their highest ever adjusted for inflation. So, I mean, this is still a very profitable company. They've got TV rights fees that are going to float them at least to 2024, and it's going to allow them to break their financial records for many years to come.
Before we go, I definitely want to let you promote the unbelievable business breakdown you did for all of 2019, not just WWE. I mean, covering the entire industry. I checked this out. It's just a phenomenal analysis of the year. If you could just give people that might not be aware what it entails and where they can purchase it.
Yeah, there is I spent all of January in Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel, creating this document that I turned into a PDF. It's called the Wrestlenomics Pro Wrestling Industry Report for the full year of 2019. And basically, it's key metrics, analysis, and insight for pro wrestling companies, including the WWE, AEW, New Japan, a little bit of Impact. There's Ring of Honor as well. So there's attendance, television viewership, merchandise sales, which is at least in WWE's case, Google search, YouTube views, social media. That's the first half of it. And then the second half, I go into a number of subjects that are sort of like longer form written articles about WWE's financial outlook, the rise of New Japan, what Ring of Honor has been doing, AEW's effect on the industry, and a lot of other subjects. You can find that at tinyurl.com/WrestleNomics2019. And that's on PayHip for $5.
There's also a link in the description if you're downloading this podcast or watching this on YouTube, so you can click on that. There's also a 5-page preview, I understand, that we'll link to as well.
Tremendous granularity, Brandon, in this report.
Tons of granularity. Only the most granularity.
hey, that's my last question: is what impression Frank Riddick left on you? I mean, George Barrios is leaving a major hole in the in our ecosystem, but in terms of Frank Riddick, any first blush reaction to the man replacing George Barrios, at least in this this public facing role? It didn't really drop any vocabulary that was left any impression on me, but I'm curious your impression of the man.
Yeah, no, other than the intricacies of doing business with the Saudi government, yeah, he was a pretty. I don't know. Frank A. Riddick is this name that I've seen whenever WWE distributes their stock rewards for the board of directors. He's been on the board of directors for a number of years. I don't know. He just seems like another I don't know, corporate type CEO. He was fine, but yeah, the loss of George Barrios is a huge blow to the Wrestlenomics universe. He was, but like kind of seriously in our story that we follow, he was a huge character and somebody that we listened to all his conference talks and hyper analyzed all his thoughts on the wrestling business and on the media business, and he will be missed.
Hey, if Ted Turner's on the Observer ballot, George Barrios and Michelle Wilson should be on that ballot, I feel.
Yeah, that's the argument that I made for sure.
So, Brandon, it's always great to catch up with you and dissect all of this data for everybody out there. It's a really intriguing part of the business, and we wish you all the best with Wrestlenomics Radio, and I'm sure we'll have you back if you are so willing to come back.
Absolutely, anytime, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Brandon.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right. That was Brandon Thurston, everybody. Do check out that PDF. The link is in the description. Mm-hmm. It's a phenomenal breakdown. The hours that must have gone into that, and the Microsoft Excel envy, something that I've never been able to master.
The graphs are incredible. Very well presented. Like if you're somebody like me who really does not have an affinity for these types of numbers, to just see a chart of like the progression of all of these different metrics is incredibly helpful. And
it's like what we talked about with Grapple like last week, like being able to take incredible data but have it presented in a really pleasing aesthetic.
Yeah. And you can follow him at Wrestlenomics, at Brandon Thurston as well. And I believe he does writing for Fightful. He's got a podcast on the Voices of Wrestling Network. If you just search Wrestlenomics Radio, he's everywhere right now. And I guess this is sort of his WrestleMania season, isn't it?
We're going to be getting back to the calls in a few minutes. We just want to mention, we did mention this on Wednesday night, but TSN did put out a press release today confirming that they will be covering or carrying the XFL games this season, including up to the championship game in April. So that starts on Saturday. And for those that were out of Canada, they were running those bumpers in and out of AEW on Wednesday night, which is probably smart programming to tag that onto.
And if there was any, further questioning about how much integration there would be in WWE television, I think today's conference call kind of answered that for you, right? How much are you expecting on SmackDown on Friday?
I'll be very surprised if they don't push it within the body of SmackDown. Like if I'm Fox, I am absolutely using that real estate on one of our highest, like of the potential crossover. Like, yes, you've got the Super Bowl on Sunday. That would be your natural to build a football audience. But second would be Friday Night SmackDown.
I could see as much as maybe a lower third mention, maybe even a commercial coming out of one of the breaks. But I mean, seeing how adamant they were to let you know that any concerns that these two companies were one and the same, they tried to wipe away as much as they can.
You should definitely try and watch the Fox feed on Friday night as opposed to the Sportsnet feed.
Okay.
Because Sportsnet will not be promoting it within their commercial inventory.
Want to go to the phone lines?
Let's take some phone calls.
Hey, caller. You're on the air. What's up?
Hey, guys. Paul from New Jersey.
Hey, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, so what I took away from this, and maybe this is from just the wrestling fans' perspective, but I know Brandon Thurston touched on it, but Brandon Ross's question, I think he's with Light Shed Part. He had said something to the effect of, Vince, what are you doing to secure talent for the future and make them stars? And he kind of alluded just like, are you just signing talent to sign talent so other places don't have them? And, Vince gave the very, answer and just didn't really say. And I just look at, like, as somebody who watches this product on a weekly basis, you can talk about all the business they do, which is amazing. They're financially stable. They're a juggernaut of a company. But at the end of the day, I think why ratings are going down, which according to Vince, they're not. And, some of the disconnect with fans, making new fans, is I've seen this company miss with the street profits they're missing with right now. Mediocre heel Bailey and Lacey Evans, who I think, her backstory and her character, if they didn't rush it, there's no reason she couldn't be on The View or Good Morning America and translating to another platform. And I just wanted you guys to just speak on that. I don't know if I have really a specific question, but just like, is that, I think Brandon Ross also said, hey, is that why this is down? Because maybe you guys aren't focusing on the talent. I just want to get your opinions on basically my thoughts on that stuff.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate it, Paul. Yeah, no, that was, to me, that aspect of the call. I mean, you can just clearly look, like, WWE is in stockpiling mode right now. That question may have been the closest we would ever have gotten to a Timothy Thatcher reference on a WWE earnings call for Vince McMahon to cite some of the new signings that they have just brought into the company. There's definitely, to me, a big gap between, creating stars and just signing talent. Like, they have never had more talent underneath their system. And in this, like, part of the whole narrative around the Performance Center is that we can build up our stars, and we've got like this factory that's just going to produce all these new, and yes, you have bodies, but how many game-changing performers do they have that mean something to business? How many performers were brought up on this investors call today?
None.
I don't think one was mentioned.
It absolutely felt to me, listening to this, that creative might be a concern with maybe a select, investors who might follow the product, but to the vast majority, when it comes to this sort of topic, it is such a minuscule, I think, small aspect of, what a year's performance might be, what seems really important for the WWE, that I'm sure they're paying attention to it, but are they focusing as much on that as, say, the Mina deal or selling your rights fees? I'm not sure.
Yeah, everything is about, pretty much guaranteed revenue streams. And that's what the company has kind of insulated itself from being reliant on such things. But to me, the difference between when you can have, a UFC 246, like that is your ultimate example of when a star clicks and the world, it sounds like hyperbole, but the sporting world stopped that night to at least watch that fight. Like, that was a major sports deal.
And this is why, like, I think I'm often disappointed listening to these investors calls with the line of questioning, because you never really get that much questioning about what is actually presented on television. And I think a topic like that is very much like, I could see why people wouldn't ask it, because it has no direct, at least like in the short term, no direct influence on financials. It's something that you're planting a seed, and then you might see it sprout 2-3 years down the line. So these questions aren't necessarily brought up, but nonetheless, of course, they are incredibly, you can argue, maybe one of the most important things to do.
I mean, you can tie like a major star hitting. You can trace that to television viewership and trends, certainly to house shows. Like, why are house shows down?
Oh yeah.
That's consumer products. When you're talking about merch, that is directly related to how over your talent is.
But it's this like kind of short term attention span, always wanting to like spike a number, spike a big WrestleMania, that I think you continue to see why there is such a reliance on bringing back old stars, bringing back celebrities in order to pop that single rating, in order to appease investors for like this one quarter. Back to the phone lines?
Yeah, let's go back to the phone lines. Sure.
Hey, caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Finally, MJ has returned to the Post Wrestling Cafe.
Yes,
Been a minute.
And what a week for you to make your return.
Yes, what a week. I've been on and on about how bad did Vince want to get rid of Barrios and Wilson that he was willing to cost himself, and Brandon answered this question for me on Twitter, approximately $500 million on paper, and that's just Vince alone, not the family members. Sent the stock into free fall, investors panicked. You got to imagine it probably wouldn't have dropped 23. It's now down 30-something% for the year. You got to figure that wouldn't have all happened today just based on the earnings miss. So to me, it's, as an investor, as someone that's played around with the stock, and as somebody that follows the industry, it's what message is this chairman and CEO, who is notorious for controlling everything, sending to his shareholders and people that are basically putting faith in him making these decisions, that he would act so irrationally. And I'll follow that up by saying, obviously, today's call was illuminating about maybe they're going to sell out these pay-per-views to sell the rights to other content providers or streaming networks. There is a great chance that comes in at a very nice number, and that looks like good guaranteed money, and the stock rebounds. So maybe that was a calculated decision. But to incur that kind of panic on the street, it does long-term damage. And you've heard me talk about, in 5 years, these TV rights are going to be up. And the way the metrics are going, the way the trends are, ratings are, I can't imagine they get the same kind of money. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But this is a long-term, stocks are long-term investments for people. So to send people into a panic, it's not just about the short term, it's also long-term.
Let me ask you, MJ, because, you say like this, action like this certainly might raise concern about Vince McMahon, but who else is there? And if you're a typical investor who maybe doesn't follow the ins and outs, I mean, does Vince still represent sort of like that pillar that always has to be there?
I'm not sure I follow the question, but who else is there? I mean, in a lot of companies, there are boards and there's votes for these things. Now, Vince owns all those B shares and he has total voting rights, so he can act unilaterally. He can make these decisions on his own. He now cites the board in the release that the board has come to this decision, but that's really just him. It does set up the next people that come into a role. They're going to be answering to him, and they recognize if there's a difference in strategy, are they the scapegoats? And scapegoats is interesting because Hunter is positioned as the chief operating officer. The global expansion is largely his his initiative. Stephanie is the chief branding officer, and for all intents and purposes, the public-facing marketing officer, although we know Michelle was doing that in the background. So when you scapegoat co-presidents like that, and you have your children in positions that are highly visible to the public, it brings in nepotism. It brings in what kind of company am I investing dollars into? And I think that really plays into the confidence level that investors should have in somebody like Vince. So I don't know if that answers your question, like who else is there? Mm-hmm. At typical companies, you see this all the time. Like I work in the space, so I'm familiar with corporate transactions, leadership changes. Usually there's a transition plan. Usually there's a runway for a president, or in this case, co-presidents, to be off-boarded while they look for a replacement, or there's a successor in line that people are already familiar with. We just know that the public-facing people of this company were Vince, Michelle, George, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Triple H, Paul Levesque, and Stephanie. So there is no real clear path to what is the succession plan, what is the transition. And it's interesting that they make not kill the network, but they're going to try to devalue what that network is, because it does raise the flag of like, what is the long-term plan for this company? It raises a lot of questions. Obviously, there's a lot to digest there. Hey, before you guys cut me off, Wade, do you know about Lego Masters on Fox?
Do I? Of course. It's actually I guess an American version of a UK version of the show that they've already done. I haven't really watched it.
Oh, cool.
But yeah, it sounds kind of cool. Will you be paying attention to it?
I'll pay attention to it if you review it.
Not sure if I'll be doing a review, but maybe I'll wait for the investors, the Lego Masters investors call to discuss.
Hey,
it.
the last thing on today's call, and Paul from New Jersey mentioned it, the AEW bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny to hear him talk about AEW is not influencing their business, yet they've invested tons of money. You look at that net income number. They had all these TV rights fees hit in the fourth quarter, and yet they reported lower net income from last year. Now, yes, I think John mentioned the investment in Stamford and what the new headquarters looks like, and there's obviously some money being allocated to assist XFL, getting that up and running. But you just look at how much money they've burned through already signing talent, and then you want to say we're not influenced by AEW. It's curious to me, and I said this a few conference calls ago. All you have to do is look at the independent merch trends versus WWE merch trends, because it's not like wrestling merchandise and consumer engagement is, I would argue, it's at an all-time high. Look at the industry you guys are in. So many podcasts, so much available income that people are willing to part with to support wrestling, and yet you look at those WWE consumer metrics, and across the board, they're down quarter after quarter. It's amazing that nobody digs into that. No analyst ever really pushed the envelope on that.
I wonder how many of them are even aware. Really? Are they just people who just follow numbers?
It's funny because it's viewed as a media company, and you have analysts covering it like it's a media company, and you're looking at content rights, and you're looking at revenue streams, and it's not looked at as a wrestling company or the way that a sports franchise might be looked at, where selling jerseys is very important to the bottom line of a sports franchise. The Toronto Raptors care about those numbers. It's almost like the WWE is willing to say, that's not our business line. We're a content company, and anything else is lost leaders, if you will, because we have to engage in live attendance or live shows. We have to engage in consumer merch to have our brand out there. It's very interesting how they've positioned the company in the last 18 months.
Thank you so much for the call, MJ. Always like talking to you.
Good to be back, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Congrats to you, John. I think that was meant for you.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and that's one other thing that as much as we can look at, slashing certain house shows, and, you would come to the conclusion that that's going to help your average because you're not canceling television tapings. You have a higher concentration of those bigger events that help your average. What that doesn't help is merchandise, because running fewer shows, that's not boosting your average of merchandise. It's just, it's less revenue that you are leaving. And granted, like,
you still have .com, but
you do, but that's, to me, it's like
it's half
an in-person purchase is going to be viewed differently. And I mean, we are talking about, for the quarter, they brought in $30.8 million. They were down $2 million for the quarter in consumer products. It is a small item in the grand scheme of things, but it is a metric to still pay attention to.
It all adds up, I'm sure. Back to the phone lines. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Oh my goodness. Hello.
Are you okay, Vince?
The other Brandon.
Oh.
What's your obita today?
What?
What's Post Wrestling's obita?
We're a private company.
If you could sell to Spotify today, would you, like the Ringer?
If we what?
No, Spotify couldn't afford us.
I'll sell to Spotify. Got it. No. Your analysis, Brandon.
Yeah, this is the analysis everyone was waiting for.
Where's your 48-page report?
I was waiting for Brandon to get on the investors call today and ask Vince McMahon, any more color on the fish that Bobby Fish could fry? Should Bobby Fish be able to fry such fish? Any color on that?
Jesus.
Oh, man. If you would have gave me the number, I would have loved to crash that.
From Brandon's New Jersey Holdings Incorporated on the line right now. And then he just bursts into laughter with Vince. That would have been a moment, wouldn't it? Well, maybe we'll send you on our behalf on the next investors call. Did we lose
Brandon? Did he laugh himself off?
Yeah, I did it in for him. The Bobby Fish joke killed him.
Okay. Well, shorter appearance from Brandon this week, unfortunately.
Some will rejoice and some will be sad that we lost Brandon.
Let's go back to the phone lines. Caller, you're on the air. Hello.
Hey, guys. First time, long time. This is Alex from New York.
Oh, hey. Alex from New York.
Hello,
we always
Alex.
like newcomers on the show. Well, welcome to the show, Alex. What would you like to discuss?
So, yeah, first of all, thank you guys so much. You guys do a great job, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. Unlike a lot of the other people, a lot of the other subscribers, Raw and SmackDown are not the worst written shows that I watch every week. My wife subjects me to The Bachelor, and
that's a documentary. That's legit though.
I understand that. It's very compelling. But at the same time, that's a show that literally, other than production value, I mean, it is some of the worst writing, some of the worst premises, just some of the most inauthentic things you've ever seen. And that's on a major broadcast network. And they're doing about double, I think, what Raw is doing on USA each week. So I guess my question is, long story short, is it so much about the writing and the characters, or is it just more about the limited audience that there might be for professional wrestling, especially with all the content that's out there? Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thank
you. You know, I think that, you know, we keep kind of circling back to this topic, and I think ultimately it's, if there was a major star that caught fire, I think you'd suddenly realize that there would be a lot of people checking in on WWE, lapsed fans or people that, you know, sense that, you know, a product is hot, and that's when you bring in non-wrestling fans to check out your product and hopefully make some fans out of them. I mean, that should be the goal. I don't believe that there are 2.4 million fans and that's it in the US that have some interest. When you see some of these WWE studies that they've done of like these ridiculous figures, they believe many more out there. When you have, to me, that star that can, you know, that to me is the difference between a couple 100,000 tuning into a UFC fight night and 500,000 new people in the US signing up for ESPN Plus that week for UFC 246. Like, that's what a massive star can do and change fortunes for you for, you know, for a big time event like that.
Back to the phone lines. Hansi, you're in the air. What's up?
Yo, what's going on, guys? How are you?
We're doing well, Hansi.
No, yeah, listen, I got nothing to add with the financials. I'm too stupid to it. So I thank you guys for breaking it down. I thank you guys for breaking it down for us. But I just wanted to get two things, and I'll you know go along. Yesterday on NXT, I gotta say I really enjoyed the Bianca Belair, Charlotte Flair, and Rhea Ripley. And even though like prior I was like, you know, I want to see Rhea Ripley versus, you know, Charlotte. Do you guys anticipate that maybe they might make it a triple threat? I know, Pollock, you don't like triple threats too much, but I just thought Bianca did so well in that segment. Like, she came off like the star more than both Charlotte and Rhea. And the second question before I go, do you think that the Goldberg appearance is just gonna be a one-off at the Super Showdown, or do you think he has a match at Mania? Because I'm kind of worried that like he's gonna squash the Fiend at Saudi Arabia, or maybe the Fiend's gonna squash him. Maybe, I don't know. But do you have any idea who you think Goldberg's Goldberg's opponent's gonna be, or is it just gonna be a one-off, or is he working a program? And I'll take your comments off the air.
Thanks, Hansi.
Well, let me ask you, what do you feel would be the more interesting Mania match of the Fiend and Roman Reigns, Goldberg Roman Reigns?
For me, it's Goldberg with either of them. I mean, Fiend versus Roman Reigns,
which from all indications is the WrestleMania match.
Is fine. I feel like I kind of can't expect what that match will be like. Goldberg is a character that I think makes infrequent appearances, and they've managed to craft, I think, a style of match for him that it feels unique and feels like it's more of an extravagant sort of like big show type of match. And I would assume that your casual audience might agree that perhaps, you know, the nostalgia of a Goldberg name might mean more to them than, let's say, Bray Wyatt versus Roman Reigns. But of course, I think the match would be better if it was Bray versus Roman Reigns.
Yeah, I think they're like, just the Fiend matches, they're very difficult. I can't even envision what a Goldberg Fiend match looks like. And
so Hansi brought up the possibility of the squash, and I think on paper, what is it, a 50-something-year-old Goldberg squashing one of your top main heels? That sounds terrible. At the same time, I would have said that same thing when you had Goldberg squash Brock Lesnar, and look at the great business they did for several events coming off of that.
I think this would be similar to when Goldberg beat Kevin Owens in a couple of seconds for the title and how that was viewed. That, listen, the idea of Bill Goldberg and Roman Reigns, I would be lying if I said I don't think that's like a big match. Even today in 2020, I think that can be promoted as a big match, but it just, to me, having to sacrifice the Fiend, they put everything into the Fiend. So I'm looking at it as the Fiend and Reigns at WrestleMania.
I think the Fiend is somebody that they put so much stock into, that they see as somebody that is set up for them for the future, that I think even if Goldberg squashes him, the Fiend would get his revenge, and this Fiend would get that win back. I don't think they would squash the Fiend unless it was to set up a rematch where the Fiend ultimately beats Goldberg. But I mean, it could be moving on to Goldberg versus Roman, which it would be a bigger match. The part of me that, you know, the part of us that I think is so disappointed, complaining on this show about their lack of creating new stars, would be really sad.
And that's why I don't see that happening. Like, The Fiend is,
done it,
you know, whether people are fans or not of the character, there's been no compromising that character. They have been all in on him, and there is no hint of them cutting bait on that character.
More so than somebody like Kevin Owens.
Yes, which would lead me to believe that, you know, The Fiend is going to be well protected going into WrestleMania.
He had another question about Bianca Belair with
the
Charlotte
three-way.
and Rhea Ripley.
I don't see a three-way.
I don't see it either. I really just saw the segment this week on NXT as sort of a way to include Bianca Belair in the conversation, so that she's just not simply overlooked, because she is the person who has the title match next week.
It almost felt like they had to acknowledge the Charlotte Rhea Ripley story by having Rhea Ripley confront her this past week, even though that probably should have been the Raw after TakeOver.
Perhaps, yeah. Who knows the reason why they timed it this way? But
what I do expect, though, is Charlotte to be pretty regular on NXT leading into Mania, and one of those weeks you should do Charlotte versus Bianca and build up. That'll be a big week for NXT doing that match on TV.
I agree.
I think that's when you should do it.
It's also, I think, a great test for Bianca Belair. I'm sure, you know, like seeing how audiences might react to her situated between these two. It's not entirely out of the question that I think this feud can be really good for Bianca Belair, even if she doesn't come out of it winning the matches.
She came off well in that segment Wednesday.
So too.
And, you know, by teasing the Charlotte Rhea match with Bianca still in there, it does at least create some doubt for the TakeOver outcome. And here is a viable option you could go with. But I do expect Ripley and Charlotte at WrestleMania, but totally do the match on TV.
Back to the phone lines now. We will get to NXT AEW ratings as soon as they come out a little bit later. But for now, let's go to the calls. Caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, guys.
Hey, who's this?
It's Boyd from Glasgow.
Hey,
hello, Boyd.
How you doing?
We're doing tremendous.
Yeah, pretty well.
Thanks for putting the call up, the earnings call on the website. It's always good to hear them. Really interesting.
Not a problem. That is available for free for anybody who wants to listen. It's just on patreon.com/postwrestling. You don't even have to be a patron. Just click on the post and listen to it. So
having listened to it on the way home, and as a prospective investor in WWE, because I manage a lot of my own pension fund over in the UK, it's a stock I could buy. What I took away from that was it's a company pretty much bereft of ideas and in denial. And when I say company, I mean Vince. The way they spin how somehow the ratings are increasing, particularly when they're talking about how the ratings for SmackDown are going up.
Yeah.
Well, in reality, the network that it's on has got a much, much larger available audience.
For sure.
So they seem to not be acknowledging that their business is in decline. And John's made a good point earlier. Well, quite a lot of callers have made some of the points he's going to make, that they seem to have this fixation on buying up talent and signing loads of talent to contracts just so they don't go to AEW. But a lot of the people they're signing up to on these huge money contracts, which ultimately is affecting the bottom line. So I think of people like Gallows and Anderson, who I think are reported to be on $500,000 a year. If they went to AEW, do you think they would really move the dial for AEW ratings? So they're spending so much on talent that as a prospective investor, when I look at, is that a growth stock or is it a dividend stock? Because the money they're spending and investing, and Vince is continuing to say he's going to invest, means that they're not going to be paying a dividend in that stock. I think the dividend's something like 1%. It doesn't make for an appealing investment for me, and I'm guessing that's why the stock's going the way it's going just now.
No, and it's a great point you bring up, Boyd, that as well, a lot of that too is fighting this perception that you don't want out there of talent leaving your company for greener pastures. And yet, you know, as we've been talking about on this call, the number of investors that are paying attention to that aspect of things is a small percentage. There is not stockholders that were up in arms that Chris Jericho was showing up in AEW. They're not paying attention to that stuff.
AEW itself is a minuscule discussion when it comes to that.
It's very small. We had, you know, one reference to it from a caller on here, and it's, you know, the idea of any of the talent that their deals are coming due, especially undercard talent, mid-card talent, that's not registering. That's to me, that's an in the bubble paranoia of WWE, of just, we've got the money to keep them, and it's an ego thing about not wanting anyone to go out there. And invariably, you could look at, they are certainly overpaying talent when it's commensurate to their placement on TV and what revenue they're drawing for the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've nailed it, John. I think it's an ego thing with Vince. At the end of the day, if you're looking at it from a normal company point of view, at the board, I don't think half these decisions would be getting made.
Yeah, and you can look at, like, personally, I'm happy for this talent making as much money as they possibly can. It's great for the talent that there's that perception out there, or at least fighting that perception. But if you're looking at it just from a business perspective of what we're making off of this talent versus what we're paying them, certainly there's talent that, it's great for talent, but the company, it's certainly, I think it's just fighting a perception you don't want out there.
Yeah, and I think the only way they're ever going to see an increase in ratings, again, you mentioned earlier on, is create stars. Because at the end of the day, you look at both AEW and you look at WWE, there's never been better, I suppose, action in terms of athletic action and athletic performers under contract. But at the end of the day, ratings continue to decline. So it's either one of two things. Fans aren't turned on to the storylines and the booking, or you've not got the stars to draw those ratings.
Thank you so much for the call, Boyd. Please call back.
Okay, cheers, guys.
We go back to the phone lines.
Rammed those calls today.
Yeah, or at least, I guess it's not so much working right now. Anyway, we'll take a call if we get it. But
a question to ask as well is what, the average WWE Network subscriber, what their response would be if you're taking off, let's just say the big four that are taken off of the network. Are you still keeping that network as a fan, spending your anywhere from, I guess in Canada now it's $12.99 a month on Rogers. Are you still spending your $10 to $13 a month for the library, for your chronicles, your takeovers that would by default become the big driver, providing the takeovers are still there?
Takeovers, I feel like they will do everything in their power to make sure that there's still attractive options, even if you take out the big four. But, I feel like anytime you change something major about any of these services, it's a constant reminder for somebody to reassess their relationship with it. Do I really need it? Can I get rid of it? And maybe you see people get rid of it. Who knows, maybe how their tier structures might play into that discussion as well. If they choose to shake everything up, maybe they offer a package where for a premium tier, you get the big four. If that's even an option, who knows? There are a lot of ways I feel like they can slice that pie.
Yeah, and replacing it with more new content that if you do introduce your Progress or other companies that you can put in there, that you're satisfying that diehard fan that is not going to part with the network.
More and more, I think, the research seems to suggest like it's catering more towards a wrestling fan that likes in-ring, like, puts a precedent on, I think, in-ring quality. And maybe investing more in that. Those might end up being, an equal or at least a comparable draw to, let's say, something like, I don't know, TLC or Survivor Series. I'm not sure. We go back to the phone lines. Who's this?
Hey, what's up, man? My call got cut off. I apologize.
Are you okay? You're safe. We were worried.
I'm good. I got my serious voice. I was gonna ask a legit question this time. You guys are talking about the big four or whatever the show's being. I guess there's going to be maybe possibly a tier. Well, they were talking about a tier service, but then I also heard like, we're going to ferry our pay-per-views over to like Peacock. I mean, because they're NBC and whatnot, and like how is that going to work? Like, is this going to be another charge that they're going to charge the fans separately, like how ESPN Plus does with the. You get all the UFC stuff, but then you're going to have to pay an extra, like, I don't know, $40 for, like...
Yeah, and let's preface, these are all theories at this point. This is nothing concrete yet or anything. But, in theory, like, if you are selling off these shows to another streaming service, the intent would be that you, the consumer, would have to go and sign up for another service to buy these big shows, and that may push people to say that, hey, if another streaming platform I have to spend X amount of dollars on to see WrestleMania, I'm no longer putting that same amount towards the WWE Network. I've got this amount of money that I allocate my budget for WWE programming, and I'm going to move it elsewhere. And that's, I guess, what they're hoping to at least mitigate if they're, going to keep some function of the network going.
Which is like, I guess Fight Pass is still, it's still viable, right? It's still solvent, right? People,
yeah.
I don't know if they're making money off of it still, but I mean, people are still just there for the library and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, they are running so much non-UFC fight programming on there, coupled with the library, that, I mean, if you're a hardcore MMA fan, there's certainly lots to watch on there, but it's not going to be a mass audience you're going to attract to a Fight Pass. But they also never made the mistake of committing their most premium content onto Fight Pass. They were doing some big Fight Pass cards like Michael Bisping and Anderson Silva. You've certainly seen that kind of dissipate. They're not putting those major cards any longer, but there's still a role for Fight Pass. It's just it's not one of their top priorities that at one time WWE Network was.
Okay, and a couple questions, I'll get out of here.
One more question, Brandon.
The fight this weekend. Do you think John Jones? I don't know, man. I think he might. I think there's a chance that he might slip. What do you think about that? I think he might. I think he'll win, but I think it's gonna be close, like the other fight. I don't know. I just think John Jones is the same killer that he was after the whole picogram stuff. Whatnot. What do you think about that? I'm out of here. Peace.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. I think it comes down to how much stock you put into the last fight with Thiago Santos. I'm definitely picking John Jones in this fight. I don't think Dominic Reyes is at the level where I'm looking at him as a significant threat to John Jones. Certainly, I mean, that left hand of his, it's something to be concerned with. But I'm definitely picking John Jones in this fight on Saturday.
We've got our AEW NXT ratings that have just come out. AEW this week did 928,000, which is up 100,000 total viewers from last week, and they also did a 0.36 and 18-49, whereas NXT is up as well from to 770,000, up from 712,000 the week prior, doing a 0.22 for 18-49.
So that's identical with what NXT did last week in the demo, and you said a 0.36 for AEW.
Correct.
So they were up 0.02 from last week, and it was 900 and how much?
928.
928. So, yeah, that's a big jump from last week. And this was a show that going in, I would say kind of disappointing for NXT that Charlotte didn't make that much of a difference, and
she wasn't really presented as such a big draw. Really?
On Monday, that was what they were pushing.
Yeah, it was one element, but I suppose on the show itself, it wasn't necessarily that big of a featured segment, at least.
No, I mean, it wasn't put into, it didn't open the show, didn't close the show. NXT was up moderately, but it was kind of a minor jump, whereas AEW, I would say, like, it was clearly there was interest in this show this week.
How much of that has to do with, outside of factors, and how much of it do you think has to do with the lashing segment? Because that was the heavily promoted thing about that show.
I could certainly see a pattern where the show grew throughout the 2 hours, peaking with that final segment, because I thought they did a really good job of building up to that segment if you were just tuning in. And, I mean, they had been promoting that since it was, the New Year's Day show that MJF laid out the stipulations. So you've had a month to build up that segment. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes, that's something you don't get in WWE. At most, you're getting a week's notice about a match or a segment. And I think AEW has learned this, because on Wednesday night, they didn't just promote matches for next week. They promoted matches for 2 weeks from now. They promoted a match for 3 weeks from now. And I think they realize if we plant a seed that many weeks out, it's going to blossom that much further by the time we get there. So Pac and Kenny Omega you have 3 weeks to think about that match, to look forward to that match, to know that match is happening on that night, as opposed to announcing it that day on Twitter.
I mean, it's the pay-per-view philosophy, isn't it? You set people's expectations up for something, and rather than promoting it on pay-per-view, I suppose you're just promoting it on a future week's television.
Yeah, and kind of the next one to look at is how well that cage match does. They're promoting it as the first ever cage match. It's in Atlanta, which should be positioned as a big show. It's a major arena they're running, and it's arguably your biggest star in the match in Cody. Mm-hmm. So those are your numbers. We'll have a further breakdown of those. In terms of next week, did we get anything announced for NXT next week?
Oh, I'm sure they announced something. I can't think about what, though.
We got next week's the go-home show for TakeOver.
Yes. So yes, it is.
That's what the big thing is. Any quick thoughts on NXT from Wednesday night?
You know what? To me, the thing that stood out the most...
Matt Riddle.
Matt Riddle, absolutely. How much fish can Bobby Fish fry if Bobby Fish could fry fish? The fact that they went all in on like making this segment about something so stupid, and the fact that it worked so well with Matt Riddle,
because Riddle's delivery was amazing,
leading this really incredibly the dumbest chant I've ever heard at a professional wrestling event. The fact that it was so successful, and the fact that I'm even talking about it right now because I couldn't get it out of my head after the fact, tells you that I think they've really found like a voice for Matt Riddle that is incredibly unique and that seems to be working, at least within Full Sail. So I was impressed by the presentation of him and Pete Dunne.
I just thought it was hilarious. I liked what they did with the Undisputed Era all night, just like running roughshod over everybody. I thought that worked out really well, and then they built up to the 6-man throughout. What else did we have on the show? We had
Dominic Dijak earning I guess he's probably going to face Keith Lee anyway, but they officially announced that he beat Killian Dane. I think they're doing a good job building that rivalry up between Dijak and Lee, this time for a title. We had the face-to-face, as we previously talked about, with Bianca Belair and Rhea Ripley, that mixed in with the Charlotte segment as well. Overall, I thought it was... Oh, sorry, the face-to-face was, that was one face-to-face. We also had a second face-to-face with Johnny Gargano and Finn Balor. That was more of a picture-in-picture type of thing. That, I thought...
It was all right.
Came out okay. I thought it came across a little too rehearsed and maybe a little bit too rushed, because it just felt like this guy had his lines memorized, and then boom, ping pong.
I thought Balor came across a lot better than Gargano did. Gargano, it was like that screaming but enunciating promo at times that can just be, it's very WWE-like.
Something just did not feel that organic about it. Did not feel like the natural flow of a conversation. But yeah, nonetheless, it's a match. I can't say I'm super excited about it, but I think the in-ring quality will be very good.
Angel Garza was back on the show right off of Raw, cut a big heel promo at the end after the Isaiah Scott match.
So it seems like he's not done with NXT and that he'll be sticking around, looking to get a rematch against Jordan Devlin.
Yeah, that's kind of where they're teasing and kind of pushing Devlin that he's going to be on 3 brands at once with NXT UK and 205 Live.
Oh, he's on 205 Live as well, right? Because he's the champion, popping up, of course. So we also had Jordan Devlin taking on Tyler Breeze, and these two had a pretty lengthy match. And Breeze's role, I think, since his return, has really just been to put over other talents. And this was a good match. Devlin's very, very talented. At the moment, I think, especially if you're a new fan, I don't know if there's anything that necessarily stands out about him other than the fact that he seems to be a really great in-ring talent. At least, I don't think much has been presented about his personality. No real backstory being given, or at least, anything that I think is that big of a hook yet. So at the moment, I just kind of find his presentation to just be that of another guy, no different than, a Travis Banks or anybody else from NXT UK. So in the weeks to come, I hope they really get into his story.
Yeah, again, that takeover looks awesome on a week from Sunday. Do you like the move to Sundays for takeovers? Do you think that could be...
Makes no difference to me. I mean, yeah. I don't think it makes any difference, personally.
All right. Well, I guess that wraps up most of the news for the day.
Thank you, everybody, for the calls.
We got a ton of calls today, so that was tremendous. We want to thank all of you for calling in. Brandon Thurston for joining us, as he does after all of these conference calls with WWE. Do go check out that business analysis. Again, the link is in the description of this podcast. And then Wei and I are going to be back. Well, I guess Wei will be back Friday night. I will not be on the show on Friday night, but Wei will be rewinding SmackDown for everybody.
That's right. We also forgot to mention Velveteen Dream made his return in the main event of NXT last night, attacking Undisputed Era, and then I guess building to a rematch or building to a match with Roderick Strong at some point.
Correct. Yes. So that was the big return on the NXT side. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Andrew Thompson will have a news update later on today. Thanks for listening to the Café Hangout.